Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Thank you for joining this GP Strategies webinar, where we'll explore best practices and innovative insights to help you and your organization improve performance.
So, our topic today is business as unusual. And so we did a piece of research during this COVID pandemic to really get an idea from both leaders and employees on what is going on in their business, what do they foresee happening in the future, and what are the challenges that they're facing. So what we'll be going through today is sharing some of the highlights from today, from the research, as well as having the opportunity to dive into some of the APAC specific results, as we felt that it was really important to have a look at not just the global responses, but also those in APAC to see where are their similarities and where are their differences, and really to open a forum for discussion so that we can talk together about what this potentially means, maybe the reasons behind it, but also your thoughts and views. So first of all, who am I? You may not recognize, excuse me, you may not recognize the picture, as I have changed a bit during this business as unusual period and the time that we have been working remotely. I've taken the opportunity to grow a quarantine beard, which I'm looking forward to shaving off when I return to Singapore. But my name is Oliver. My background has been in leadership roles across the Asia Pacific region. I have headed up teams across China. That's where I spent the beginning of my career, the first 10 years. And after China and leading remote teams really across third and fourth tier cities, I moved to Singapore, where I took on a role running Asia and Middle East for a large American multinational. That obviously involved a lot of business travel, which is now a thing of potentially the past and hopefully will become another situation in the future. But I actually had a bit of a change of heart when my daughter was born, and I looked for a role that would allow me to spend more time with family. Little did I know that this year I'd be spending a huge amount of time with family, to the point where I have to lock myself into a room every time I have a conference call to avoid my 5-year-old and my 1-year-old, who really, really want to be involved on today's call, I'll tell you now. So that's a little bit about me. What you won't see is behind the scenes, we have a fantastic team here at GP. I can see my colleagues Mavis, Joanna, Maria, and Nitha all on today's call, and they will be checking the chat, looking out for any audio issues that you guys are having, as well as answering any questions as they come up. So they're really the brains behind the operation and keeping everything running smoothly. So that's enough about me. What I would like to do is just acknowledge that the situation that we're facing, and that there's a real human cost. So, you know, as of I think yesterday, these were the numbers, and you know, although we sometimes think of COVID-19 as being an inconvenience and just making life a little bit harder, you know, just a reminder that it is a real global tragedy, and nearly 1 million lives have been lost so far. And you know, that's really the shadow that we are all sitting under when we talk about these. And you know, I don't mean to be flippant. You know, I do want to keep today's session light, but I did think it important to call out the fact that although many of the countries that we are in have handled COVID-19 very well and haven't seen the same loss of life as others, there are countries that are still really struggling with the pandemic, and you know, there are some real personal tragedies that are happening. Now, how this is impacting us, and I think that's such an important question, one that we are all living to some degree or another. And I just wanted to highlight this slide because it's really been a move from what we experienced as usual to what is the new normal, which really is unusual. And, things that we used to kind of take for granted, like commuting to the office, maybe some of us didn't particularly enjoy that, but those things that we used to do are now becoming quite unusual. I know that the GP team in Singapore, for example, all of us are no longer commuting into an office. We are all working remotely. From a business travel perspective, that's being highly curtailed as well. And look, so much has changed in the world of work, let alone our larger world environment, right? I'm sure many of you have had holiday plans cancelled, have not been able to travel to see family or friends. And, there's a real big difference in how we perceive different things. When was the last time you shook someone's hand? I certainly know where I'm staying right now, it's now common to not shake hands when meeting somebody for the first time. And, how are our children doing? Are they still at home? Have they gone back to school? That's really going to depend on the area that you are in. And, from my own personal perspective, I came on a 1-week holiday to Sri Lanka back at the beginning of March, thinking that COVID had kind of run its course in Singapore and that we were sort of over that situation. That was definitely not the smartest decision that I've made. So I'm on month 7 of my 7-day holiday. But again, it's just something that we have to kind of take in our stride. And I would say we are certainly redefining how we work, but also how we live. And, I just want to pull an example that's very close to my heart, having 2 children, and I know is a big impactor on an awful lot of people who have children of school age, and what that means from just a sort of a simple day-to-day element as going to school. So, like I say, it's not just business as usual or business as unusual. It's life as unusual as well. Life is now becoming, for many, confusing, stressful, and a little bit scary. Children across the world are really experiencing a very different school year. For a lot of students, I certainly know from my home country of the UK, those that were due to take exams this year have gone through a hugely uncertain time around their university places, what their exams actually meant, and almost rioting in the streets in the UK in dealing with this situation. And instead of new school backpacks, getting ready to go back to school in September, or for those that in the Southern Hemisphere, that January or that mid-year restart, children aren't getting new backpacks, they're getting new hand sanitizer, right? Everyone is going in with masks on, they're making personal conversations and interactions more challenging. And all of us that think back to our own childhood and our school years, really the social elements of school were often more important than the knowledge that we gleaned during the school year. So what does a return to usual actually look like? Would schools somewhat lead the way in reopening? And I think we're starting to get some early indications of what the business world is starting to look like. And, schools are perhaps an early barometer, as in many locations they went back before offices. And I just want to share with you a picture that really went viral. This is in the US. This is a high school in Georgia that went back, one of the earliest schools to go back in the US. And, they had planned on meeting social distancing rules and face mask rules, etc., to try and make it safe as possible. But obviously, this looks like a normal school day. And I think it really is a stark contrast to how schools in Asia, and if I look at, this is from a Chinese high school, when they went back to school back in May, a very different approach. And I think for those of you that are based in APAC, based in China perhaps, or countries like Singapore that have taken COVID-19 extremely seriously, they may see that there is a stark contrast in how the countries that we live and work in have responded to the threat of coronavirus versus those in the West. So is this how work will resume? Will we all be going through temperature checks, maintaining social distancing, and wearing masks? How is airline travel going to look? How many of you, and do sound off in the chat, when was the last time you got on an aeroplane and flew somewhere? I will be getting on a flight on the 7th of October to finally return to Singapore. And I'll tell you now, I'm nervous about that journey. It is a big event now. It's the longest time in my adult life that I've been without getting on a flight. And there are many new regulations, and I think the experience will be very different. So David sharing that November 2019 was his last flight. Mine was March 14th this year, and so nearly 7 months ago. Anybody else, when was your last flight? Do you remember? Haven't flown since February. Thank you, David. David Watling, it's good to hear from you. Thank you for joining us today. So not since February, and I know that you were definitely a frequent flyer. I know that my boss was flying at least 2 to 3 times a month between Sydney and Singapore. It's definitely been his longest time without a flight. Krishan has shared with us in June, managed to return back to India finally, or from India. I'm not sure there. JC Roslin, in February to Jakarta, felt like a lifetime ago. Yeah, we have taken for granted that ability to jump on a quick flight, to go and see our teams that work in different areas, our families that maybe live in different countries. Sonia says, in August from UK to India, relocated from India. Charine, in February 2020 to Manila and been grounded ever since. Yeah. So, this is just one example of what the new world order looks like. And when we think about this, are we going to try and continue life as it was before with new restrictions and being more careful? Or are we going to move to a world which revolves around our home office, around setting up a table in the kitchen? I think many of us that have been on Zoom calls every day might have quite a lot of empathy for the 5-year-old in the left-hand picture trying to do learn from home kindergarten, which I don't know about you, but I have a kindergarten age child, and the home-based learning really for the attention span of a 5-year-old is it's not a natural way for them to learn and socialize and understand the world. So, is this virtual learning arrangement from work and school sustainable? It's important. It keeps kids and employees safe, but does it take a different type of toll? And again, sound off in the chat as we go, and to your thoughts of the impact that this working virtually has throughout the presentation, where I'll share some of the research on this, And you look at the child on the right here. It's a kid doing distant learning, but he's crying. He might be safe from coronavirus and protecting his family. Maybe he has a family member that is at high risk and vulnerable. But is he okay? David shares from his experience, many leaders also have the attention span of a 5-year-old. That's very true. And another David Suyana, I apologize if I get your name wrong there. Parents are not ready to have kids 24 hours a day. Absolutely. And let's be honest, I think that there's been some wonderful reconnection amongst families, but really 24 hours a day when you're trying to manage a day job where potentially your work is at risk, your job is at risk if the company's performance isn't there or if your industry has been hit. Yeah. Are you ready to be a full-time worker and a full-time caregiver and a full-time teacher to your family? And then there's the issue of how do you cope without leaving the property or leaving your home for many days at a time? Those of you in Singapore would have gone through circuit breaker. I know that definitely had an impact. It certainly had an impact on the COVID numbers, but also maybe it had an impact from a mental health perspective. I personally did 45 days in lockdown here in Sri Lanka. They were very strict on their curfews to make sure that the disease did not spread, and it did work. But 45 days staying in the same location was difficult. I've got to admit, I had it easier than some. We did have a swimming pool, so I could entertain the kids there. So I certainly won't be complaining about where I spent my COVID lockdown. So as we return to this unusual, what's the best approach, right? How can we care for each other, and how can we reemerge? And more importantly, for those of us on the call, those of us that are leaders ourselves, or those of us that work in the training and preparation and development of leaders in our organization, how can you lead in this environment? So I want to introduce our research. So last month we wrapped it up. I can see some chats jumping up here. Okay, we have something from Vanji. It seemed more work with work from home. Okay, it seems like more work when you're working from home, as my calendar gets crowded even after office hours. For kids, their energies are not diverted as compared to activities outside. Absolutely. Now, I would agree with both of those points. Very interestingly, one piece of the research we found was people working from home reported working an additional between 2 to 3 hours. It was actually about 2.6 hours additionally on top of their usual length of work. So although maybe for some of us leaders, we felt that our people were a little less productive, they were potentially working longer hours. I'm very fortunate. On top of this research, I've been working with literally hundreds of companies over the last 6 and 7 months, and really heard firsthand from a lot of their managers and from their employees that there's this merging of the blending of the boundaries between work and life. For some, that's a real positive. They're able to take a moment during the day to get some quality time with children or family members, or maybe some self-care. If there's an activity that they take, like yoga or meditation, they feel that they have the freedom to do that. They feel that they have the freedom to work when and how is best for them. Whereas for other people, it's that blurring of always being on, your mobile phone pinging you on Microsoft Teams or Skype or one of the other, Yammer or another different technology, where there seems to be no sacred hours anymore, no time when your boss won't approach you or your team members won't reach out to you. So absolutely, that blurring of the lines that has been good for some, terrible for others. And that's really talking about who can work from home. If you're coming from an industry such as the service industry, hospitality, food and beverage, perhaps your front line within manufacturing or power generation, which is a lot of the clients that I work with, where they don't have the luxury of working from home. And there's an entirely different safety element that has been brought into play. And not having that luxury to return back when they're ready, but having to return back far earlier, if there is even a job for them to return back to. So we'll get into that in just a moment. So we reached out to both leaders and individual contributors to find out how they're feeling about a return to the physical workspace, what work looks like for them now, and really what's most concerning them in the past several months, and what would they need from their leaders in order to remain engaged. So we don't want to just hear what's going on, we want to know what they want in order to remain engaged. So what I'd like to do today is share with you what we've learned from the research, and also a framework for how leaders can think about moving forwards. So with that in mind, if I can find the right slide, I wanted to share one piece of information. So the first thing we started asking about was safety issues, right? Because of those numbers that I shared before. We wanted to get a potential gauge on anxiety. How are people feeling? And interestingly, the results here were about the same for APAC and the wider global audience. And what we learned is that while the uncertainty in the current environment, it's it's certainly there, that uncertainty, but it actually seems like through the pandemic, it's kind of fortified the confidence employees have in their leaders, that their leaders care about them. And in fact, employee confidence that their leaders take their well-being seriously has actually increased across our sample group from pre-COVID world of 59%, up 11% to 70% in the current COVID-19 world. So I think that speaks volumes to how organizations and leaders have really focused on the well-being of their employees. And look, we know trust is an essential element of a really strong leader and employee relationship. And with trust, employees are willing to go above and beyond. But the stakes are even higher than they've ever been when leaders are being trusted with decisions about, the certainty of livelihoods. Will I have a job tomorrow? Right? And in some industries and certainly in some locations, really beyond the certainty of livelihoods, but really the certainty of life and safety. So I think in some ways, safety needs were maybe easier to meet in the pandemic earlier on when the decisions were really clear-cut, right? Leaders and companies were willing to put a lot on the line to ensure the safety of their employees, simply get them to stay at home, and they were looking really at, just making sure employees were safe, not knowing how long this pandemic would drag on. Have an interesting question here from Sushil. Thank you, Sushil, for reaching out with this. Any insights on companies for India? I'm not going to go in this session into individual countries. I'm going to focus as APAC as a whole. So when I do share these APAC information, it will include respondents from Singapore, Korea, China, India, all across the APAC region, but I won't be diving into specific countries. But I'm very happy to set up a separate time when we can maybe dive into that data for you, Sushil, and share, also connect you to colleagues in India that can share some of that information with you. So with that in mind, there are some differences in the APAC numbers. So what we found was that for both APAC and global, 79% of leaders and 73% of employees believe that their organizations are taking the necessary precautions to address physical safety, right? So that initial working from home, that initial really putting the foot down and focusing on safety has certainly paid off. But now what we're finding is globally, more than half of organizations are starting to return to a physical workspace. Interestingly enough, across the APAC region, it's a little less than 40%. So what we're finding is in Europe, North America, and even countries like Australia, to a certain degree, are returning back to work faster than those in the APAC region, especially countries like Singapore, for example, where we had a report of a lot less people coming back. Rosin said, I presume the data is from diverse industries, a mixture of local and MNCs. Yes, so this is a full data set. We haven't broken it down based on MNC or NMC headquarters. So we would have respondents from smaller companies. We would also have smaller local companies. We'd also have respondents from multinationals, both in the same multinational from the US to Singapore to China, to India, to Bangladesh, etc. So yes, very diverse. It covers all industries and all sizes. So, and we can get into the demographics. I can share the report with you that will run you through that later. So one of the interesting things is that APAC is going back slower than the rest of the world. And we really wondered, what are the issues that are most concerning to employees and their leaders and the people? Are they aligned on these concerns? So again, this is something across the global data that is mirrored in the APAC data with very similar numbers. And, with uncertainty, I think many of you have heard the description of this pandemic, that it's far bigger impact than the financial crisis of 2008. It's also more similar in its magnitude as the Great Depression when we start looking at the economic impact of individuals. So what we found, it's perhaps no surprise, 46% of employees that we surveyed have shared concerns directly with their managers regarding economic uncertainty. It's a real big question. And remember, this is across all industries, and I think that there certainly is a difference between different industries. If you are in the airline industry, food and beverage, if you're in hospitality, these are industries that have been hit particularly hard. Potentially tech and pharmaceutical have done better, although some of those companies that we see as tech companies have been hit really bad, such as Airbnb, for example, TripAdvisor, traditionally seen as a tech company, but they're very much in the travel business. 25% of their global workforce has been let go. Those of you that are based in Singapore will have heard the news of the number of people that have left Singapore Airlines, for example, as they go through this tough time. So the economic uncertainties are there. There's also, an interesting parallel with Wall Street versus Main Street. A lot of debate on how the markets are still doing relatively well versus what's actually happening in real people's lives. And really a big part of that, I think, boils down to the fact that Wall Street is really focused on larger organizations, publicly listed, obviously, whereas so much of the economy is reliant on smaller organizations, service industry that is just not reflected in Wall Street, really is reflected on Main Street and people's confidence as consumers. So Sushil asks, with these data set, employee engagement and trust are the biggest piece of the puzzle to improve productivity. Now, I'm really glad you raised productivity because that's something that I'm going to be diving into in just a moment. So as I look through these, only 26% of leaders feel strongly that they're totally prepared to lead through economic uncertainties. When we dived into that, a lot of what we found was leaders being unsure of how to frame these conversations, right? Traditionally, a growth or a career conversation would focus around promotion and opportunity and would be a positive conversation to have. Now it's around what can we do as a team to keep ourselves relevant, to hit our KPIs, to be valuable to the business. So a lot of leaders are sitting there thinking that they're not adequately prepared to have this new type of conversation. And it's something that we're working very heavily on. And in fact, we will be doing a public session preparing leaders for this exact eventuality and really reframing growth in their organization. So we'll be able to share that with you. So 45% of employees are concerned about work-life balance. The good news there is that leaders are really focused on that. 36% of employees have concerns with social and emotional well-being, which is really a big increase from the past. And we talked about this briefly, and I think if you see here just some research on mental health concerns, a lot of the statistics that we're seeing, for example, here on the right from the Commonwealth Fund, are seeing stress and anxiety and sadness happening. When was the survey done? So it was completed last month. So we were taking responses all the way from April through until the end of August. So that was the date range of our survey. These mental health concerns, these have come out. These are not our statistics, but one that I just wanted to raise, that anxiety and depression has been spiked. This is US data on the left and global data on the right. It's certainly been a big element that's been reported in Western countries. I think it's one of those elements that within APAC, I think is definitely a factor, although reporting on it is a little bit less, perhaps. I'm going to move through some of these headlines, but really remote work being the hot topic for those that can, and the impact that it has. And speaking of that, 2020 has been, at various times, many people have said that we should just cancel 2020. Hide under the covers and just wait for things to get better. But to some of the points that were raised earlier in the chat, I want to talk about productivity. I want to talk about engagement And I also want to talk about resilience, because I think that these are key things that we've seen coming out of the data. And before we jump in and share these findings, I want to get your thoughts. So here's a question that we posed to our survey respondents, and I'd like for you all to participate as well, just to see how this group is feeling. So can you answer the poll that's now up on your screen? I have been able to maintain my job productivity in the current environment. Do you agree strongly? Do you agree? Somewhat agree? Are you neutral? Disagree? Or disagree strongly? So which of those? So if you can please answer that. Have you been able to maintain your job productivity in the current environment? And don't forget to hit submit. We want to make sure that we get your answer. Jamie, thank you for annotating there that you agree strongly you've been able to maintain your productivity, but please do it in the poll. If you're on mobile, it will pop up in the middle of your screen. If you're on a laptop or a desktop, please look to the right-hand side of your screen for that polling. So, Mavis, are you ready to close the poll? And then we can get the answers if we've got enough responses here. So just waiting for those answers to come up. Mavis, can you hear me? Right, okay, I'm getting people in the chat saying they've responded and hit submit. Mavis, thank you for sharing those. If you were talking to me earlier, Mavis, you were on mute, so I couldn't hear you there.
Sorry about it.
That's okay. So let's have a quick look at the results and from a percentage perspective. Okay, so if I take agree strongly and agree, we've got here probably quite an honest group. We've got here 44% saying that they've been able to maintain productivity in the current environment. So not necessarily a huge amount of people saying that they've maintained their productivity. We know Jamie certainly has. So looking at the answers to this and what we were finding, you know, how they compared with the individuals we surveyed. So perhaps than the global number. The global was 65% of leaders saying that they felt their people had been productive during this time, and 70% of employees saying that they felt they'd been productive during this time. And, you know, I think this is representative of organizations really finding more agile ways of getting things done. But one of the really interesting things, and I'd love your thoughts in the chat, when we look at the APAC numbers, for employees, it's pretty similar. 67% of employees still say that they've been productive during this time. So still a pretty high number. But leaders, only 39% of leaders say that their people have been productive during this time. So that's a big, big change from the 65% in the global data down to 39%. So it appears that leaders within APAC do not feel that their people have maintained productivity whilst working remotely. Does that surprise you? Do you think that that's maybe representative of how leaders measure their people, perhaps? What traditionally in some of the working environments in certain countries across APAC has been a way of telling who was the hard worker and who wasn't? Is it perception or is it reality? So Sushil says, does this gap denote distrust? I think that that's a really good question. And if this is what's happening in your organization, is that something that you want to address? So Abby Mayu is saying this number is in the APAC region. That what you're seeing on your screen right now is the APAC region, yes. So 39% of leaders, only 39% of leaders say their people have been productive during this time, versus a global average of, if I jump back up, you can see 65%. So we've got distrust from Sushil. Anybody else want to chime in the chat? Why do you think that APAC leaders feel that their people have been less productive during this time, whereas their employees still think they've been productive. JC Roslin says, potential perception, since seeing is believing. Working virtually, you're not able to observe employees actually doing the work. Jamie says, an Asian mentality. Please elaborate on that, Jamie. Sandeep says, has that anything to do with the cultural or work values in a regional sense? Right? Is it a cultural thing? We have from Sushil again, I feel that APAC leaders are more result-focused than process-focused. So they give a lot of importance to outcome. When this outcome is not there, they feel they are not productive. I would question that, Sushil, because if they truly were outcome and not process focused, then surely if the outcome was coming, they would see their people as being productive. If they were process focused and unable to see the process happening, then perhaps that would explain this number. Moini Pang, I apologize for ruining your name there. Managing remotely is something very new in Asia. Peggy Pang says FaceTime is important. David says a lack of trust, only trust in numbers. Well, I would say that, especially with organizations that I'm working with, those that were used to working in offices, one of the big shifts for the managers was a move from presenteeism, judging their people based on who is in the office and when and who looks busy, to really trying to dial into both the leading and lagging indicators of performance. What is the actual output of their people? Are they getting projects completed on time? Are they having an impact on results? So Jamie says, Westerners tend to have the mentality that as long as the results are delivered, then what you do in your time is down to you. Yeah, perhaps that's a cultural difference. Abby Mayo says, do you think culture or perception between leaders and employees about productivity are different? Or are there issues that cause a significant number about productivity? Tareen says, maybe the result is badly impacted during the pandemic, hence viewed as less work and less productivity. Some complained about bosses checking in on them time to time and more reports to be done. Yeah, have some leaders potentially, in a quest to understand what their people are doing, created an extra burden of administration. Looking between finite and infinite results may be a reason. Thank you, Sandy. The customers is also a difficult position overall. FWQ, I'm not sure what that means, continued to have good business. Yeah, so potentially, okay, Jenny says, APAC is a large region, or actually curious to see further breakdown. Yes, I think that'd be really interesting for us to do, to dive into country-specific data. One of the things that we've noticed here, and we've pulled out from the data and follow-up interviews, is definitely trust. Trust while working remotely, a shift to working remotely, which is maybe more usual in other areas of the world and less common in a lot of the markets that we surveyed in APAC. So trust is definitely a big part of this. Also, some good points about the impact on business. So I'm going to jump into another quick poll question. As we look at these challenges, there's been a lot of talk around actually maybe some of this perception of poor productivity is down to just market conditions, right? I'm no longer able to sell as well because of the market, or our customers aren't there because of the market, or we're not able to perform because of the market. So please answer this poll question and hit submit. I am confident in my manager's ability to lead my team through these difficult challenges. The really interesting thing is, I think this is a question that has changed over the last 6 months. I think initially that confidence was there because, you know, the difficult challenge was surviving COVID-19. Now it is thriving in a post or during COVID-19 world that doesn't seem to be going away, dealing with that uncertainty. So please put in your responses and do hit submit. I'm just going to give you a little bit more time. Maybe it's when we're doing these polls, if you can make sure that we don't see the no answers, because it will skew the results that we have. So you'll need to change that option on the polls moving forward. So hopefully we've got enough answers, Mavis, and we can share the poll results now. So we'll just give you a few more seconds and get those poll results up. So I can see the poll has now ended. So hopefully, Mavis, if you can share those results, please, so that we can see. How confident are the people on today's call that their managers are able to lead their team through these different challenges? Okay, let's have a look at the results. So might be a little bit skewed there, but we have agree strongly and agree. We've got a total of 38% agree strongly or agree that the managers are able to lead the team through these challenging environments. Oh, jumping ahead there. So what we found globally when we look at resilience and that ability, confidence of the leader's ability to lead the team through challenges was 61%. So we're maybe a bit more of a pessimistic bunch here today. But the interesting thing is only 47% of leaders are feeling resilient, and only 10% rate themselves as very high on resilience. The interesting thing is employees are far more confident. Now, when we look at resilience in APAC, the numbers are quite stark. They are a lot lower. Only 32% of leaders are feeling resilient, and 5% only rate themselves very high on resilience. There's also a little bit less confidence from their employees. Only 41% of employees are confident of their leader's ability to lead the team through challenges, and only 11% of employees are very confident in their leader's ability. So again, does that maybe speak to trust, or does it speak to the wider environment? Are employees in the APAC region more acutely aware of the economic impact of the current situation? So looking at those numbers again, 61 to 28 versus 41 to 11. And what we also found was, what do employees want? Right, I'll give you a minute, just scan through this data. But in the early days of the pandemic, what we were hearing in this research was that people needed from their leaders, above all else, was empathy. That was the top when we because we can look at the data based on time. And it was really empathy was important, understanding my current situation. We still see the importance of empathy, but now direction and support and connection are more important. And if we dive into the APAC data, what we find is support, direction, and trust is really important. So one other difference that I'll point out is there is a bigger difference between what employees feel they need to remain engaged and leaders feel they need in the global data than there is in the APAC data. Employees and leaders seem to be a little bit more closely aligned on what's required to remain engaged. And again, its support, direction, and trust were the top clear leaders from both employees and leaders themselves. So interesting that trust element that we raised in our chat question is raised here. Now, as for mindsets, it's support that leaders need to provide, but also the leader's mindset. And this is an area that we're really passionate about. We've been doing a lot of research into leadership mindsets. And what we saw in the global data is that leaders really underscore the agile mindset as being important, right? I have a question from Tricia, which I'll jump back to the previous slide. So Tricia says, is the measure saying what leaders need themselves or what they think employees need? So this is what they think employees need in order to remain engaged. Thanks for that question, Tricia. So diving into mindsets, so agile mindset. I think it comes as no surprise to any of us that leaders believe that an agile mindset is really important right now, as there is so much uncertainty. Now, if you've been following our research, this is quite different from what we saw a year ago, where growth mindset was really the highest priority, and inclusive mindset was much less important. I think it's no surprise that when we look at the global data and the large number of respondents from the US and Europe, that inclusive mindset is a hot topic right now. Interestingly enough, in the Asia context, the inclusive mindset is a bit of a distant fourth after both growth and enterprise. And that in APAC, still 77% agree that agile mindset is very important, but 68% of leaders indicated a growth mindset is still critical right now. So I won't dive into the topic of inclusion and diversity. I think that on the surface level, we see the difference in the global data versus the APAC data due to the current social climate across most of the Western world right now. I'm interested to understand, and it is actually something that we're doing research on right now, as to why in APAC inclusivity and diversity is less of a top topic, and I'm more focused around the great benefits commercially that a company can get from being very diverse and inclusive, from everything from innovative thought and those kind of elements. It's interesting, Michael, you say less diverse societies in APAC. I think that's definitely true of certain areas of APAC. I personally live and work in Singapore, which has a very large, diverse population. So yes, thank you. It is an outlier, right, in comparison to some of the other cultures across countries like Korea, Japan, and China. So I think that's definitely part of it. I think it's very interesting to see the companies that we work with that are focused on inclusion in APAC. It tends to be driven from head office. It tends to be multinationals. Rosin says, I think we do have diversity, but we're more inclusive, and hence it's not really an issue for us. This is, I feel, a debate that we could allot a good, solid week to having. So I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole right now, but definitely a topic that we want to explore and discuss, especially when we look at the research around the positive impact on innovation, diversity of thought, entrepreneurial spirit, and these kind of elements that certainly exist in more diverse and inclusive environments. And especially when we start looking at psychological safety of teams, where we move away from maybe the ethnic or demographic definition of diversity and into diversity of thought. So again, a rabbit hole that I'm not going to dive into right now because I want to cover the rest of the topics and give you guys a few minutes of questions as we come towards the end. So the essential struggle, the tightrope that our leaders walk, and it's going to continue for some time, right? And what leaders need to do is, what do leaders need to do in order to balance between themselves and their people, right? As leaders, we've all got KPIs. We've all got to keep the business going. A lot of the time when we're thinking about the satisfaction and engagement of our people, we're thinking about really, are they going to have a job tomorrow? But how do we do that? How do we push forward? But how do we also go slow in order to go fast, right? How do we recognize how people are today, but also how they can be tomorrow, right? How can you be compassionate while still getting results? Because at the end of the day, that's what we need to do. So what I want you to do is just drop in the chat, what are the tensions that you're balancing as a leader right now between being empathetic with your people, understanding their challenges, their difficulties in this new normal, the challenges of maybe working remotely, or the challenges of those that need to go to work and maybe have a vulnerable family member at home, and that isolation and separation, that empathy versus the results that you've really got to bring in. We've moved away from being able to indulge in focusing on safety and empathizing with our people and really making sure they're happy, because this is only going to be a couple of months and we'll recover quite quickly, to being something where we really need to start bringing results, or there's not going to be a company to employ those team members. So what have we got in the chat right now? Let's take a quick look. Sushil says empathy versus result is a real challenging tension that they're having to balance. Presence versus agility. You don't have to use the examples we have here. Maybe it's something else that you're looking at. Michael says presence versus agility. Uncertainty is a huge distraction. I could not agree more. From a personal perspective, if I'd known I'd be in Sri Lanka for 7 months, I would have done things very differently, especially with a rental property back in Singapore, and especially with how I set up my working environment, etc. That uncertainty really makes it hard to be agile, because where do you commit? And where do you just kind of battle through because you think it's going to change? A lot of presence versus agility. We've got resilience versus safety. Is resilience versus safety really a tension between two things that you're balancing, or can increased resilience improve safety? Or I just want to understand, Ali, what you're getting at there. Business as usual versus transformational measures. Jenny, thank you so much for sharing that. I absolutely agree. I think we want to try and get back to some semblance of normality, get back to those economic successes, but we need to transform. We can't do it without transforming. So that's definitely a tension. Security versus results. That's a great one to raise. Security versus resilience. Thank you, Michael. Results versus well-being. Peggy, absolutely. We need to have those results, but we need to keep our people engaged and well. So thank you for sharing that. And, you know, I want to, as I move towards the end, I want to just kind of leave you with a bit of a model that we've been focused on for some time and working with our clients on, which is really recognize, rewrite, and restore. And this framework as a way of kind of thinking about this new unnormal, this uncertainty is, you know, to recognize, restore, and rewrite, right? With the additional research that we've been doing, we've kind of solidified it and found that sort of very quickly, as we're running out of time, that firstly, as leaders, we need to recognize where each person is and their unique needs. And, you know, I think it's never been more important than it is today to recognize all of our employees as individuals, to understand their identity. What drives them? What are their goals? What are their fears? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? We really need to focus, when it's harder than ever to do so, working remotely, to really recognize them as an individual and their unique needs. We also need to restore, right? Restore that confidence, that faith, especially safety in countries that are maybe having huge challenges with the coronavirus, where there's a shifting landscape every day, where on one day it's safe to go into the office, go to work, go to school, carry on as normal, and the next you're going into lockdown, right? And this isn't just happening in the US or Europe, this is happening in APAC, right? We're seeing resurgences in numbers, we're seeing big changes in what's happening in India, we're seeing flare-ups in countries like Dubai in the Middle East, we're seeing COVID cases coming back to parts of Australia. We need to restore that confidence in our people. And finally, we need to rewrite the contract between the employee and the leader. We need the leader to once they've recognized and they've focused on that they start to rewrite that contract and really understand what their people need and give clarity. Right now, there's so much uncertainty. Every employee needs from their leader a clear direction, a clear message. And in fact, you know, as we look to that for APAC, support, right, restoring that trust, that safety, direction, clarity. What do I need to do? How can I do it in a way that will help me get recognized, will help my performance have an impact on the team, and then that trust, right? So that really boils down to rewriting that contract. And look, we're running low on time, so I won't go through some of these elements, but obviously, you know, empathy is really going to remain key. You know, when we're looking at recognizing, we want to be empathetic. Of course, many of us here on this session, we're very familiar with active listening and how we can utilize those tools for empathy, how we can clear the hurdles in order to support our people, whether they're technological, how the office is set up, adjusting to people's working hours, respecting their time. And look, you know, a lot of companies are doing things in different ways when it comes to working virtually if they can. And we've really seen that shift from some companies are going to working from home permanently. And that's great if you can do that. Many will be working from home until the end of 2020. We've seen Microsoft announce that, Amazon, for example. Amazon's an interesting one because, of course, warehouse staff don't fit in that working from home bracket. So how are they managing that? And then those that are looking to remain remote until summer 2021. And when we look at an organization like Google, that I just want to dwell on for just a moment, Google's entire ethos around building out their campuses and really creating an environment for these spontaneous connections between people. Google understands the power of that. And so Google will certainly be coming back into their campuses, but they also understand the importance of that psychological safety and allowing their people to come back when they feel ready. So there's no right answer right now, but what we can do is build trust and build support and give direction. That's what our people in APAC are asking for. Now, Sushil asked, what about organizations which require personal selling, like pharmaceuticals? Well, we do a lot of work in the pharmaceutical industry. We also do a lot of work in financial services, where traditionally it's been about building relationships face-to-face. And honestly, there has to be a new normal in the environments that you're working in. You know, APAC is such a diverse region. Some countries are coming out of their lockdown and they're having the ability to meet face-to-face again, while others are looking at ways to really manage these relationships virtually. And again, there is no panacea. There is no silver bullet. And I think a lot of it comes down to, again, having leaders that are able to work with their people, to recognize each person, their unique needs, their unique business needs, what can be done for them, and how they can do their work, right? And rewrite that contract between them as a leader and the employee themselves with that clear direction and support. And really, we've got to find new ways of working, right? All of those of you that are consultants or facilitators or that you train in-house, you already know that you had to do this, right? We love Classroom because it has a huge impact. One-on-one coaching sessions, face-to-face over a coffee, are hugely powerful, and technology will never fully replace that. But what we have to do is find a way to still have an impact during these difficult times. And the great thing is, what we're finding is that innovation is allowing us to do things in different ways. And if we do it correctly, we can sometimes do it in better ways. For example, in the learning space, I'm not suggesting that Classroom will never come back. It absolutely should. It serves a fantastic purpose. But what we're seeing is learner-led journeys, social engagement, taking control of your own learning becoming a much bigger topic, and having great results to hit more of that 70% of the 70-20-10. I can see some people are now needing to sign off, and we are getting towards the end of our session. And so really, I just want to leave you with the fact that as a leader in APAC, you need to look at both connection and direction. That's what your people are asking for. That's what's needed. Look out for that gap, right? Trust is key. What is that gap between the leaders in your organization and their employees? And how can you help to close that gap? We're doing a lot of great work with organizations right now in briefing their managers. We have upcoming, and I think my colleagues will be able to share in the chat a link to sign up. We will be doing an open public session of redefining career in a disruptive world. So that will be a virtual classroom session, a small group where we'll be able to dive into these topics and share best practices and content. Feel free to invite colleagues, invite leaders in your organization to do this. An opportunity for them to really close that gap. How do they address performance? How do they look at career growth in an economy where promotions are maybe no longer on the table and hitting KPIs is more important than ever before? So I just want to leave you with that, and we will be able to share the study. Thank you, Jamie, for asking. We'll be able to share the full report with you all, and that will be released early next week. So we'll be able to get that out to all of you that attended today so that you can dive into that data and see for yourself. But again, connection and direction. So thank you all for joining us. Please do, if you are interested, take a look at that November 18th virtual classroom course. That's a full piece of content. It's going to be fully facilitated as we would an in-house virtual classroom for our clients. So thanks, Tricia, for your kind words. Elsa, I'm glad you found this insightful. Peggy, it's great to see you on another one of our webinars. Thank you so much. Michael, thank you very much for getting so involved. Your feedback, your thoughts were really valuable. David, both Davids, I really appreciate that as well. JC Roslin, thank you so much. So, thank you everybody for joining us today. It was a whistle-stop tour through some of the highlights, and I can't wait to share the full report with you and really connect with you. Get your thoughts, get your feedback. What are you seeing in your organization?
This webinar is brought to you by GP Strategies. Together we can create a world where business excellence makes possibilities achievable. You can access more webinars or download additional resources at gpstrategies.com/resources-library.